Yeah.
You suggest that zero growth is the model, but with a growing population, where will the jobs come if you have zero growth?
Okay, the message to the jailed folk is the struggle continues. It has to. You can't stop. I mean, I think it's terribly important at this moment that we be persistent. We've had all of these movements over the last few years that have erupted and then gone down, and in effect, the powers that be are used to the idea that there's going to be a massive march one day, and then it's all going to disappear, and nobody's going to notice. That's why I think it was so important to occupy the space and keep it occupied. And I think we have to keep on occupying spaces as much as we possibly can, recognizing, of course, that this is running into all of the problems you know full well. But it's very important that we not get diverted and divided. That's the other issue that I would say. Let's keep solidarity. Let's keep let's keep at it and keep the message simple, because there's a very simple problem here, which is just simply the concentration of wealth and power and the way in which it is exercising political domination. That's it. Latin America is a very diverse place. I mean, I get nervous about lumping everything together in Latin America. I think what happened in Venezuela and to some degree Nicaragua, I have to say I'm a little bit skeptical about some of the things going on in those two countries. On the other hand, what happened in Bolivia was really absolutely stunning from 2000, 2005. I think now they've got the classic kind of problem of what happens when you get state power. And I think Morales is in a difficult situation of having to compromise, if you like, with the outside forces and to some degree with his own internal bourgeoisie, and he also needs to extract the resources to get the money to develop, and at the same time the indigenous populations, and so there's a very difficult situation emerging in Bolivia. But I have great admiration for what the Bolivians have done, and similarly I have great admiration for what's going on in Chile. I mean, it's really stunning what the students are doing, and they're extremely articulate, very well organized. And I went to a high school, and some of the high schools are occupied, and it's incredible just listening to 15-year-olds talking about, political processes and so on. And by the way, something that's very interesting about the Chilean movement is that in 2006 there was an eruption in the high schools. This is the same cohort that did the eruption in the high schools in 2006 that's now in the universities. They know what they're doing. But they've been at it for 5-10 years, and I think we have to also imagine ourselves being at this for 5-10 years, because this is not going to be solved very easily. Political power is incredibly nervous. I mean, you can see by the way in which they're orchestrating police presences and all this kind of stuff. It's just kind of just amazing. So it's going to be a long haul. Sorry, what was the last question? It was zero growth. Yeah, I've been around a long time, and I've heard that actually the problem of global poverty can only be solved by redistributing out of growth. That's what I've heard since 1950. I'm old enough to remember what they said in 1950. It never happened. It's got worse. Now, if there was going to be real redistribution out of growth, I would say, yeah, let's have a bit more growth then. And I think I'm not against growth everywhere or of every sort. Obviously, you've got to be nuanced about it, and there are some parts of the world where growth, I think, is probably necessary. Yeah, but some of the growth you see around in the United States, do we really need that? I mean... And a lot of that growth is around crazy consumerist kind of nonsense and can easily be dispensed with. And then you kind of say, well, but if people are not going to consume, then where are the jobs going to come from? Well, this is like, I used to have these big fights with my mother. My mother said, you can't get rid of capitalists because they give us jobs. And you say, excuse me, there are all sorts of other ways you can get jobs. I mean, we can go out collectively and do stuff. I mean, there's loads of stuff needs to be done. I mean, there are schools falling apart. There are all kinds of things. Loads and loads of work needs to be done. All we need to do is to find adequate incomes and adequate, living wages and things like that for all of those jobs. And if we took the billions that are earned in 1 year and distribute them around and sort of had living wages for thousands of people, then you'd have the jobs and much more useful things were being done. So I think it's perfectly compatible to have a zero growth and considerable redistribution of resources that allows everybody to have a decent standard of living. I mean, right now you have half of the world living and getting obese because it can't, it keeps on consuming far too much. And the other half is trying to live on less than $2 a day. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I think that it takes a political movement to redistribute, but a lot of redistribution has to be pushed into the political agenda.
Okay. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. I have a questions in thinking about an alternative future and also in relation to the Occupy movement. In my personal opinion, the Occupy movement is not a singular movement. It's only a beginning to to an alternative future. So towards the end of your talk, you talk about how we can actually learn from institutions like Walmart and just-in-time management. And I just wonder if you have any specific comments about how we can actually integrate these technologies into future social movements.
My question is, do you think the recent fluctuations of the stock market are some kind of method of extraction? And if so, how can that be stopped?
I'd like your thoughts on the following two statements. One, perhaps technology has come so far that we don't need everyone working. If you have one person feeding 100 people, is there going to be a permanent unemployed because we're just so efficient? The second thing is overpopulation is surely a fundamental driver of many problems, and sooner or later we're going to hit into an environmental wall. How do we address the problem of world overpopulation?
Let's take one more.
Thank you. You spent a long time making a really great case for the end of capitalism, but since there isn't a David Harvey think tank yet, I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more on some of the solutions and maybe give us an agenda.
Well, you'll have to get me back next year to do that. I'll match that with the first question. I think, social movements are bubbling up all over the place with different ideas. One of the arguments I have with many of my students and also with some of the people in the social movements is that they're often a bit of a victim of what I call a fetishism of organizational form. That there's only one organizational form that's going to work. And the favorite one is horizontality. Everything has to be horizontal. And I kind of say, well, and I love these assembly things and horizontality and all of that. I think it's great. On the other hand, if I'm, and I say, imagine you're on a jet and you're flying across the Atlantic, and all of a sudden the pilot comes on and says, well, we've got a bit of a hold up here. The air traffic controllers in New York City have gone into assembly mode and are now deciding whether they prefer United Airlines to Continental in terms of their labor practices. There are many aspects of the contemporary world which are what I call tightly coupled systems, which need instantaneous decision-making. I wouldn't want my anarchist friends in charge of a nuclear power station, for example. And you can say you don't want nuclear power, and I tend to agree with that, but on the other hand, there are many systems like that. And so you have to start to think about organizational forms that can actually address the nature of the problem that you're looking at, instead of kind of saying, I'm not going to touch that because if you violate horizontality and if you're hierarchical, you're a Leninist pig, you know, I mean, I get called that anyway. But so you kind of go, we need to think through organizational forms that the left are using. And again, I was very impressed with the Chilean students. I mean, it's very democratic, but they're not frightened of leadership. They're not scared about having leaders, and leaders' job is to lead, and at the same time there's a strong control over what leaders can do. So, and this was true also in Bolivia, and if you look at what happened in El Alto or something like that, you see all these mixes of hierarchical forms and horizontal forms. So I think the left has to think about that and be prepared to say, you know, well, let's look at the organization of Walmart, and it's the efficiency of Walmart in terms of delivering goods. I mean, let's face it, in a socialist society, we would like things to be efficiently run. No? I mean, some things anyway. I mean, other things we might just have fun and not worry about the efficiency at all. But other things, I think we want the sewage disposal to be efficient. And so things like that, I think, you know, have to be sort of factored in as to what the alternative might look like. The fluctuations in the stock market, I think it's all over the place because, you know, it's a lot of it's computer driven, and I don't think there's any way in which it's easily manipulable. I think it's just driven by, you know, all over the place sentiments, although people have organized ways in which they can make money when the stock market goes up and make money if it goes down, which is the genius of much of the financial system. Overpopulation. Now, this is very interesting. The problem in Europe is not overpopulation. It's lack of population. I mean, the big problem is that they're at zero population growth. Now, the answer to that, of course, was to open the borders to immigration. And one of the arguments over Turkish accession into the EU is that labour supply going to be available, you know, and of course Turks have already been imported as labourers into Germany anyway. So many parts of the world, Japan for example, China's beginning to run very fast into an ageing population situation. So one part of the world, again, it's a bit like I mentioned earlier, one part of the world is close to zero population growth, and the other part is still booming. And if you look at the conditions in the two parts, then you would kind of say there's an obvious relationship between various things that are going on. The single most important thing that would have an impact on population growth would be education of women. And therefore the women's question is crucial. If women were highly educated and became part of the labour force in ways, I think the population problem would essentially disappear. And interestingly, though, of course, as Marx pointed out, a surplus population is absolutely necessary for the accumulation of capital. And therefore population growth is something that is frequently stimulated through the dynamics of capital accumulation. But the population problem is, I'm not saying there's no problem there, I'm saying that actually its connectivity to this dynamics of accumulation is very specific and needs to be understood in terms which allow for the gradual reduction of population growth rates, which I think we've seen happening very, very strongly, even in China, but not, of course, in India. So that when you compare those, so there's a lot of variation in all of that. Okay? All right? I think we're there. Okay, thanks very much.